All right, TA.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. My hardest thing here with TA is I have so many questions. I think I had 13 pages in my notes here. We're not going to get to all of that. But why don't we start with just kind of building off of what we just heard with all these great startups that are out here tonight. What do you most admire about entrepreneurs?
Well, I started with courage, but someone took one that. But I think it's energy, right? To do what we have to do takes a tremendous amount of energy, and that in and itself is infectious. When you're around entrepreneurs who are excited about their ideas, talking about their ideas with customers, their family, everybody to an annoying level, the energy of entrepreneurs is super fun.
And I didn't ask our entrepreneurs that came up this question, but what do you least admire?
I don't know if it's at least admire as much as what annoys me is a lack of time spent with customers. So a lot of people spend a lot of time talking about the fictitious customer. I'm going to sell to this one or this one or this one, but haven't spent enough time talking to real customers. And when you ask them, like, what's the difference between customer A and customer B or prospect A or prospect B, they don't actually have the answer because they haven't talked to enough customers. So that's what I'd say annoys me as opposed to don't admire about.
Yeah. So we're going to start off with some questions in the sailing realm. I don't think many people know this about you, and you kind of have to dig into your background to find this. I think maybe your humble Midwest roots growing up in Michigan City, Indiana, that you don't know this much, and I had to dig around to find some of the major accomplishments that TA has done in his sailing career, which are vast. Including America's Cup winner in 1992 and competitor through the mid-90s. So pretty impressive stuff, which takes a lot of discipline to get there. But I wanted to start, and I know not everyone in the audience is a sailing fan, but since we're going to go deep here and get a little real and raw, I want to start with something that happens in startup life and out on the sea, failure. And in this case, catastrophic failure. TA in his mid-20s, 1993, he was competing in one of the most grueling sailing competitions, the Whitbread Round the World Race. His team was cranking. He was in first place, I believe. And off the coast of Brazil, something unexpected happened. The mast broke. The mast broke, and you're out there in the sea, and the dreams of first place, you're on your last leg, thinking you're heading home for the prize. And the mast breaks. What was the startup lesson that you've taken out of that experience?
Well, it's one of those things where in that particular race, it was around the world, twice through the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean is the most difficult part. That's a picture from the Southern Ocean, Thanksgiving 1993. Wake up in the middle of in the morning.
You're not in that picture, are you?
I'm here in that picture.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely there in that picture. But we had made it through the Southern Ocean, and we had what felt like an insurmountable lead over the competition. So we're sort of like going around the track. You sort of feel like, I got it in the bag, and we're just a normal night going up the coast of Brazil in the second to last leg, and the mast fell down. And at the time that we were doing it, it was scored as a cumulative time race. So an hour here, an hour there, we had plenty of, but mast falls down, you're losing days at a time. So I can remember it very clearly, about 7:52 in the evening, very clearly. I was about to go off watch. I was thinking about, okay, well, I'm going to now go and have a little meal and go to sleep, and then bang, boat stands up straight up. What the hell is that? Okay, light goes around, oh, mast just fell down. So the first emotion that you have is everybody safe? And I'll probably bounce back and forth between startup lessons here. So is everybody safe? And is the boat safe? So are we going to live to fight another day? That's the first emotion. And that we were able to do. Then the second emotion is, how the hell did that happen? Like, I thought we had this figured out. I thought we were in good shape. I thought we had prepared for this. But how did that happen? The next emotion is I was in this to win it. Like, we had emotionally thought about, like, we're going to totally win this thing, and now we're not. And the emotion of the whole team, or much of the team, or certainly my emotion was, man, as soon as I get to land, I'm getting on a plane, I'm going home. because my goal was to win. And we had effectively achieved much of that to that point in time. So if you think about it as a startup lesson, you know, goal is to get sold or IPO or whatever exit you're thinking about. But the skipper in that case was a New Zealand guy I was sailing with. I was the only American on the boat. And what he was able to do, well, so we're on the coast of Brazil. We're not that far off Brazil. So we're going to go to the coast of Brazil. We're going to, you know, save the boat, fix the boat. We had about 2.5 days where we basically turn left on the course, go straight to the coast of Brazil. And what he was able to do over that time was to reframe the goal of success. And I didn't recognize it at the time, but in retrospect and having done a lot of startups as a leader, reframing the goal of success. So first was, you have a responsibility to your teammates. Like, we all got in this together. We've all sacrificed a tremendous amount to get to this place, to be on this team, and you have a responsibility to your teammates to help them finish. Second was, we have a responsibility to our sponsors. In that case, it's like people had given us a bunch of money. We built an expensive boat. We actually built 2 of them. That was the faster one. And we have a responsibility to our sponsors to finish this race, hence your investors. And probably third and most interesting is you have a responsibility to yourself. So many of us grew up sailing. Many of us dreamed of doing this round the world race. Many of us dreamed to get to that place. And the opportunity to reframe it and say you have a responsibility or an opportunity to ultimately succeed in what you started off. Now, you may have thought, I'm going to win. And you can't control whether you're going to win or lose, but you certainly can control whether you're going to finish. And so that sort of 2.5 days went from, I can't wait to get to Brazil to find an airport to go home to move on to my next thing, to a reframing and a re-energizing of the team to go do this thing. And what ultimately happened is we got to the coast of Brazil, we jury-rigged the mast, we then limped our way up the coast of Brazil while they were making a brand new one in New Zealand. We put a new one in, we finished up to Fort Lauderdale. Then the last leg was from Fort Lauderdale back to England. Well, we won the last leg handily. That's actually a picture of the last 2 or 3 hours of the race, sailing in. It was the best sailing day of my life. It was, as you can see, incredible sailing. It's about 30 to 40 knots of wind down the English Solent outside of England. We were the best that we could be, and we had just hammered everybody into that last leg. Now, in total, we came 5th overall because of the time difference that we had when the mast fell down. But in terms of emotional satisfaction of, as a kid, having a dream to do this, being able to do it well, to be able to have a failure and build back from it, and to do that in sort of, I'd say, pretty demonstrable fashion was amazing.
Was there something that was said, or was it just an action by the skipper that led you to mobilize to do that?
I'm not sure I remember the details well enough to know, but Chris was the skipper in this case. He was a very hard leader, like in a sense of super intense, worked harder than everybody else, and in many ways I think it was a blend of him saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is what's important to me, this is what might be important to you, and then slowly but surely adding that motivational component. I don't remember like the rah-rah speech, but it was, how did that sort of unfold over the next couple of days period of time? And there were other people too. So I was very inexperienced. I was inexperienced sailing offshore. I certainly never had seen anything like that before. And we had a few people who were very experienced on the round the world race 2, 3, 4, 5 times before. And so those people were able to sort of bring some of us younger guys up into, like, why are you out here? What are the goals? And let's reframe as a team to be successful.
So in that case, you reframed the discussion and still found success out of that voyage into England. You know, fast forward a bit to 2000, your second company, I believe it was, HelpShare, which you co-founded with your brother Rob, who's in the audience here tonight, and who's given me some great roast material for later, so we'll get to that. Thank you, Rob. But you guys started this company, and there was a mass-breaking moment for HelpShare. It was 2000, the dot-com bus was hitting, and you were running out of money, and quickly. In this case, did you reframe, or did you just decide we have to bail, and there was the decision, we're bailing and we're done, and how did you make that decision?
I don't know, Rob, did we reframe that at all? Not really. I mean, sort of, but I mean, in that sense, to add just a little more color, so it's 1998, we start this company, brother and I together. We think we had a pretty good idea. Effectively, that idea, for anybody who's familiar, is of Quora, what Quora is today. We had sort of the similar idea, but a white label Quora that you could embed into lots of other online communities. Experts are out there, people have questions, how do we most effectively route, reward, and rate all the people in a sort of question and answer sort of way. That was the idea for HelpShare. That was a pretty good idea. We went out, we raised a little bit of friends and family money, a lot of guys I knew from sailing, started the company, built the product, got our first 5 paying customers, went out to raise our next round of capital, February of 2000. Bad timing. Now we could blame our failure on bad timing, which I largely do. We could have done a lot of things differently, but by and large, we just showed up 6 months too late. Maybe we were too methodical, maybe we waited till we had too much, maybe we should have raised money on the hype, don't know, hard to say in retrospect. But I very clearly remember the last meeting that we had with the last investor who would take a meeting who said, you know what, we're just not funding anything right now. And at that point in time, like we were done. Like we had about 13 people-ish, I think, on staff. I remember pretty clearly walking back into the conference room and saying, hey guys, like I'd love for you to keep working on it, but we can't pay you anymore. And there's not a lot of reframing that goes on there. Like, it's just flat out failure. Like, you're done. It's over. Rob and I worked on it for a lot more until our wives were smart enough to say, hey guys, like, it's over. Like, it's done. Like, A, we're out of money. B, both of us had young kids. Emmett, who's here, also was 1 or 1.5 years old. And my daughter was 1.5. They're about the same age. And at some point, like, you need somebody who cares about you, who cares about your dream, who can see how hard it was to tell you that it's over and to help you to get to moving on, to thinking about what's going to be next. And thank you, Teresa, for doing that. Thank you, Julie, who's not here, but Teresa's here, right back with my wife. And, you know, it was super hard. I mean, I'm a little bit emotional now. I remember the meeting so clearly. I remember people's faces around the table. I remember the dream is over. Type of moment, but I retain that email address. I keep thinking about it today, and it's a little bit of reminder that all the best laid plans, all of the preparation don't always work out the way you thought they would.
So in this case, there wasn't a moment where you knew you had to bail. You just had to bail, and it was over, and maybe an outside force, your wife had to come in and say, you really should stop. There have been other incidents or examples in your career where you've sold companies and you've decided to bail, I guess, per se, sell a company where you might have thought it was too early or wanted to keep going for that extra mile. How do entrepreneurs know when that time is right to make that transition, to sell or not sell or keep going or not going?
Well, I just want to make one clarification because I'll get it at home if I go. Teresa did not tell me I had to stop. Teresa was always very supportive of what I wanted to do, and I think it takes that in a family. And yet at the same time, the reality of what it feels like, and at some point you need someone who cares about you deeply to help you to see what is sort of the next step. So in no way did she say, hey, you need to do something different. It was us coming to a realization that we had to take the next step in our own career, and that part of it was at least parked for the moment. So on the sales process, I've sold 2 companies, one to Google, one to BlackBerry. I think in both cases, it was about, is there a vehicle to realize our vision bigger, faster, better than doing it on our own? And I think as an entrepreneur, you perceive a future world that you are trying to create, and you raise money and you get people and you get them on the vision for that, and you're working toward that future vision. And in certain cases, you think, well, wow, if Google owned this thing, we could actually impact a lot more people than the normal path that I might take. You know, raise this money, get some more people, raise this money, get some more customers, etc. In the case of BlackBerry specifically, how many GIST users are out there? I know at least a few. Okay, couple, great. Hi, Byron. So GIST was a smart address book. It was a next generation address book. So it would connect to your inbox, your calendar, it would pull all your contacts, it would enhance them with social information, and every day you'd start your day knowing who in my network is in the news, Before every single meeting, I knew everything about the person I was interacting with. We started that company. We had around 25,000 users at the time we were acquired. We had 2.5 million contacts in the database that we knew how they were connected. We knew a lot about them. We knew how the network was forming. It was incredible. BlackBerry came along and said, listen, we have 65 million users that are email-centric, that are business professionals, that if we connect this GIST thing to that network, granted there was the iPhone BlackBerry situation happening at the moment, but still, we would have the world's largest connected social graph. We would know how everybody in business knows everybody. The strength of those connections, how they were changing over time, and about those people. And that was so exciting to me, to think about the future like that, to think about what that product would look like. And we were already integrated into Gmail and Outlook and iPhone and Android and BlackBerry and Salesforce. And thinking that every business professional on the planet would be able to access that thing that we built in the hands of BlackBerry was really exciting. That was good for our investor. It was good for us personally. But that is what was driving me to make that choice as the CEO. But it wasn't just my choice. It was our choice to do that. And so I think that same goes for Synosis as we think about what we were doing there, which was acquired by Google, is less about the financial part, though you have a responsibility to your investors, you have a responsibility to yourselves, but more importantly is you have a responsibility to think about how do I impact the world the way that I thought I was going to when I started the damn thing.
Yeah. So now at Pioneer Squares, you're in the business of starting up companies and spinning them out rather quickly, but you're also killing things. So I want to know how you're trying to decide what projects to keep or kill.
Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. So I've been at PSL for about a year, and it's incredibly exciting because the partners that we have at PSL and the team that we have at PSL, a couple of which I've been working with for 20-some years. So our first developer at HelpShare works at PSL. Our first developer at HelpShare worked with Teresa before they worked with me. So basically known Adam for nearly 30 years. It's amazing. And 25 years. So how we decide on killing or investing in a company is sort of an alchemy. It's sort of, it's a little bit of this, a little bit of this. But in general, the easiest way for us to kill an idea is one where we just can't find market traction. We just can't find that customers want this thing, and we've got a pretty sophisticated way of thinking about testing for customers and where are they and what do they want and what messages do they have. That's a pretty easy way for us to kill it. 2 is sometimes competitive landscape. You don't know about a competitive landscape until you start paying attention. You start paying attention like, whoa, all these companies are kind of doing the same thing, and we can't find a real differentiation in this area, especially when companies have raised money from good investors. That's a good reason to kill something. But by and large, there's a bunch of ideas that sit there waiting for a magical CEO. And a lot of what we do at PSL is surround a CEO, a first-time or even a multi-time CEO, with the infrastructure, the idea to go scale a company very quickly. So I would say there's the ideas that die, which are largely no market traction or too expensive to acquire customers. But there's a bunch of ideas that just sit in limbo, waiting for us to find the right person. And as soon as the person comes, the idea may morph. The idea may be slightly different. So if you and I took GIST today, exactly as it was, 6 months from now, may be different. You take it in one direction, I take it in another. So the process is pretty well articulated internally, but our long pole in the tent is finding the person who's going to be the CEO, who's going to make that their mission, and take it on and allow us to get behind them to go turn it into a big company.
And you said there's this special alchemy that you go through when you're making those decisions. Your business partner, Greg Gottesman, is very different from you. He's more of a idea generator, creative thinker, and you are a mechanical engineer, very process-oriented, very disciplined in terms of how you're making decisions. How do you resolve conflict between the two of you as you're going through those decisions?
And he really loves that about me. He really does.
He probably needs it, right? I mean, doesn't he? Isn't that the nice yin and yang of co-founders working together with different skill sets?
I think the simple answer is that the process itself rectifies that. So it's not about he or me or any one of the MDs. To the extent that Jane shows up and Jane takes the idea and we say, oh my gosh, Jane's incredible, let's bet on Jane, and whatever she does, we're going to go with that. So Greg is amazing at being able to find the Jane and find the idea and put those two things together. And I think with us together, and not just me and Greg, but the whole partnership, the ability to sort of surround that entrepreneur and take what is maybe the kernel of an idea and surround them with both process and creativity and get that out into market is really the benefit of what we're doing. And I think to scale a company, you need both. You need the inspiration and you need infrastructure. Yeah. And if we're going to scale PSL or anybody scaling companies out there, at the early days, it takes just this deal making. It takes this weird, you can't really be predictive about it. You can't say we do this thing, then this thing, then this thing necessarily, because you just never know what's going to happen. But as it starts to scale, the need for, we usually do this thing, then this thing, then this thing, and we know what parts are broken, what things take longer, what things we can be predictable about. And I think that's where we are as PSL, is in that place where we know that it's working. We just need to continue to take what works before, which is art and creativity, and add a little bit of science and structure.
Cool. What's the coolest startup idea you've seen this year?
I mean, there's 15 children there, so it's a little hard to say which ones are.
Doesn't have to be in PSL. It could be something you haven't outside of PSL.
I'm going to say PSL because, and I think the one that immediately comes to just my initial reaction is Boundless. So Boundless is, for the simplicity, is TurboTax for immigration. So you take a very complicated process, which is incredibly stressful for people who are going through it, and make it easier, the same way we did with taxes, make it more programmatic, more predictive, and for the people who are involved in that, presumably much more successful. That, for me, is a company that is what I would call a do well, do good company. I hope it becomes a gigantic company. I hope we do very well as investors and all the other investors do very well in that. But more importantly, I hope that we can do well in that, and that people who want to go through a legal immigration process in the United States or other places can do it a lot more efficiently. And it's really fun to invest in companies and be involved with entrepreneurs who clearly have an answer for do well and do good. And I like those kind of companies.
And what's the thing that's getting you most excited today as an entrepreneur or investor?
Well, the category that I'm most interested in broadly as an investor, an angel investor, an entrepreneur, or even inside PSL is a category I call quantified health. So anywhere we're using data, mobile, machine learning, AI to improve health or human performance. So on one end of the spectrum is stage 4 brain cancer, you're going to die next week. On the other end of the spectrum is Olympic gold medals. Across that, somewhere in the middle is wellness. But I'm particularly interested in how do we use technology to drive health and human performance. And we have a couple of ideas we're working on at PSL. We've invested in one called Sentinel Healthcare. I'm on the board of one called Volt Athletics. That's the category that's most interesting to me, and I think it's a gigantic category to invest in. And it's clear to me that in most cases there's a do well, do good to that type of investment. And for me, being 53, having done this a lot of times, I choose and I want to lean into spending my time on things that have a very clear do well, do good type of approach and have global impact. Like there's very few companies that could affect every single person in this room, or every single person in this country, or every single person in the planet, notwithstanding some people may not be to afford it or access to it yet. But at some point in time, mobile, data, machine learning, AI, health, human performance affects every single person on the planet. That's exciting.
And you're a bit of a quantified health nut and certainly an athlete. What are the one or two things that you are tracking in your own personal life?
Sleep quality and waking resting heart rate.
There you go. Good things to follow.
Very easy. I'm just going to dive into that a second. So my waking resting heart rate is super easy, right? Buy a $2.99 app, sleep tracking app, Apple Watch app, doesn't matter. Wake up in the morning, test your resting heart rate. Mine is between 50 and 52. If I'm under stress, if I haven't slept well, if I went out for too many beers one night before, if I'm traveling, my resting heart rate will be around 57. If I live at 57, 56, 57, 58 for more than 3 days in a row, I almost always get sick. I've now found causation and correlation between a very simple measure that costs me nothing really to measure, and I can usually get it back if I just sleep more than 8.5 or 9 hours one night somewhere along the way. So I'm normally a 6.5 hour a night sleeper type of person. That's my normal kind of mode. And if I can now track, I'm like, oh, 56, 57, get myself a Saturday night or a Friday night. I'm just going to sleep in. I'm going to make sure I'm getting myself more than 8.5 hours, almost straight back down. Causation, correlation, very simple measure, simple sensor, camera phone, and a direct health benefit for me.
Cool. I'm going to circle back to sailing for a little bit because I know we've got some sailing fans in the audience. Absolutely. So but I'm tying this into startups certainly. As a startup founder, you're the skipper, I would say. You're the CEO typically and running the show. On the boat, what was the role that best suited you?
So it depends a little bit on the size of the boat. Because the bigger the boat, the more specialized the role. So in the 92 America's Cup, thank you very much. In the 92 America's Cup, I was a grinder. So that meant I turned the handles and turned the winches. I was inexperienced. I was incredibly fit. I just finished my college.
I'll get that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm kind of clumsy, really. Thank you. So in 92, I was a grinder, and so I was inexperienced. I did whatever job I could. I did whatever I could on the boat, and I leveraged what I had, which was fitness. And I trained harder than most people. I came with a better base of fitness and moved into, I'd say, the middle of the pack with regard to grinders. That was the America's Cup we won. So I was there as a very, very small part of the team, where I learned a tremendous amount. And for all of us who are startup people, it's kind of like joining the team and then you IPO and you're like, oh my God, you IPO'd with that company. And like, well, I didn't really have that much to do with it, but you're right. And you get the watch in sailing. You get the watch. That's the normal prize that you get for winning important regattas. You end up with a fancy watch. And so in that
You don't have it on tonight?
I tend not to wear them, but I have a drawer full of them at home. That I almost never wear. I wear my $80 Casio watch because I don't like to, I don't know.
If you had a Super Bowl ring, you wouldn't wear a Super Bowl ring? That kind
I
of
don't
thing?
know. I don't know. I have a few of those kind of rings too. They're also in the same drawer. So anyway, in 92, I was a grinder, which is really I was just there listening and doing what I was told and trying to learn as much as I could. 93, 94 around the world race, everybody kind of does everything. So you're really trimming the sails, you're really driving the boat, and so I did everything, and we rotate. Some people are better or worse at one thing or another. The 95 America's Cup, I was really into a place where I was now getting to more the top end of the sport, and I did what's called the mast. So in that case, my physical job was really pulling the sails up and down. Height and long arms help for that. I weighed about 230. I weigh about 205 now, so I was quite a bit bigger and stronger at that point in time. And the mast also has an important communications job. So as you go around the marks, for anybody who's a sailor in here, you're basically changing sails. So the spinnaker will go up and the jibs will go down. So you're changing, and depending on where you are competitively, you have a lot of different maneuvers to do and a lot of different coordination of different team members. So we're going to do this kind of maneuver, and this is going to happen, and you're going to do that part, and I'm going to do this part. So you effectively have a communications role and a coordination role in addition to your own physical role. And that was what I did in the 95 Cup. That's what I did on Sayonara, which is Larry Ellison's boat. And I maintained sort of that middle of the boat, using my physicality to my advantage and using sort of a strategic communications role as something also important in the boat.
Any lessons from those roles that you've applied to startups?
I think that in the maneuvers themselves, the skipper or the tactician and the mast are the co-founders. They are what are we trying to achieve? Where are we going to do it? What's going to be the complexity of this? And you do that part, and I'll do this part. And in many ways, it's also the like I'm seeing you, right? Like we're still doing that same thing, right? And no, we're changing that thing for whatever reason. And so that feels to me in a co-founder kind of role, where I'm clearly the skipper or the tactician is the CEO in that analogy. But in that sense, it's being able to react in the moment. It's being able to react and understand can I change the plan in a very short amount of time? And if I change the plan, who has to know about it? And if I change the plan, how much risk do I put everybody because we had a plan that we talked about and now we're not doing that plan anymore? If we change that plan, does it create a competitive advantage, which is the only reason you change the plan? Or you change the plan because something went wrong. Like, oh, well, that guy just fell overboard, which happens sometimes. Okay, well, he's not there anymore, so can we still do the same drop? Can we still do the same thing? Or now you have to do that part because I was going to do that part, but he's not there anymore. So it doesn't, I mean, and that's not unsafe, especially in course racing, but it does happen. And so you're changing the plan for a variety of different reasons.
There's so many lessons I'm sure you can take from sailing or the sea that you can apply to business or startup life. Is there one that really has resonated with you or stuck with you?
Have we overused the sailing analogy?
No,
I think
so. I think people want to hear more.
I think we're getting in the red zone.
Yes.
Well, there's a few blog posts I've written about it, and I think there's two different ones. So the round the world race stuff and offshore sailing, the main lesson is it's incredibly difficult, and persistence matters. Persistence and concentration matters. And the people who can persist and concentrate longer ultimately win. That's the offshore stuff. The onshore stuff is technology creates boat speed advantage, and if you create enough boat speed advantage, any of you can get on the boat and sail it. And that's sort of the same in startups. So if you have an engineering team, or even a recruiting team, or a financing team, or whatever, but mostly engineering team, if they create enough of an advantage, anybody can run the company. And that's what happened in '92. Like our tech team was incredible, and we paid a ton for it, and we had way more people than everyone else, and they were better than everyone else, and we invented and experimented and failed so many times on many different things. But when we showed up on the starting line for the America's Cup in 1992, just literally sailing circles around the other guys. We could go the wrong way, we could screw it up, just the boat was so fast. And that's true too in many of our technical categories. Like you create competitive advantage, like, oh, it's 30% faster than everybody else. Okay, I'm choosing that solution. It's 20% cheaper, whatever the advantage is. But especially in '92, and part of the reason we lost in '95 was we didn't raise enough capital. The other team experimented more than we did. They were more persistent, more organized. Boat speed advantage. We actually had as good or better team on the boat, but we were slower. Just couldn't win.
Interesting. So a little bit of quiz time here. I'm going to ask you who said this. I think you're going to be able to figure it out. The essence of winning is teamwork. That model allowed me to beat some of the best sailors in the world. I didn't want any superstars. We rated everyone in 3 categories: attitude, teamwork, and ability. They had to be 10s in attitude and teamwork. I had 3 guys who were 10s in sailing, but 2s or 3s in the other categories. I cut them all.
No idea.
Bill Cook.
Oh, there we go.
This was a quote from Bill Cook, the so-called hick from Kansas. This was the engineering whiz, really, who funded the 1992 America's Cup winner boat that you were on. What does that quote say to you? Or does it mean anything to you?
Well, now that you say it, it resonates. I mean, I can remember him saying those types of things. I think Bill did a very good job, and he's what I would say the good Koch brother. No judgment, only a little, only a lot. But you know, Bill was very good at setting up a management structure and innovating in a lot of different ways. I mean, you think about the Gantt chart that we had for the 1992 America's Cup, it was incredible. Like all the innovation, all the different people, all the coordination. And Bill himself...
Colton, let's go to that next slide, too.
Bill was a really poor athlete. He was very smart, but a really poor athlete. And so I think he was also very motivated by what he was creating, which was really a family around America Cubed. And so this sort of indexing toward sort of passion and emotion. And it was built a lot around Gary Jobson and Buddy Melgis, who were luminaries in the sport that he hired to really build that team. And so he did a really good job of it. And you know, there's the result of the team. And it was, that's a very small part of the team. On payroll, for the 1992 America's Cup were over 200 people. 36 on the sailing team, but design, engineers, cooks, massage therapists, boat builders. It's incredible the team that he really assembled and the camaraderie that he really built, especially on the sailing team as he was part of that, but the broader team as a whole.
And you were initially cut from the team. You didn't make it initially. Why was that? And then how did you fight your way onto the team?
Well, I just wasn't good enough. I got the tryout. So I grew up as a pretty decent or good sailor in Chicago. I saw this round the world race video when I was a kid, and I said, like, I want to do that sometime. It's kind of like if you're a kid and you see like Mount Everest, and you're like, oh, I want to climb Mount Everest sometime. You don't have any plan on how to do it. But as I got out of college, I said, okay, I need to make a plan. So I'd met a couple, ultimately Buddy Melgis and Gary Jobson, who were part of founding this team. I'd met them through my mom, who had volunteered in office of a previous America's Cup campaign. And I wrote them a letter, like, hey, here's my skills, here's what I know how to do. I'm interested in doing the round the world race. Can you help me learn the things I need to learn, because the next round the world race is like 3 years in the future. Like many of us hopefully have written to somebody who's done lots of startups, and you're like, I want to do a startup, here's what I know how to do, I'll work hard. And they said, like, oh, we're totally happy to introduce you to some people, but in the meantime, we're putting together America's Cup team. Would you be interested in trying out? Sure, why not? So I flew to San Diego. You just kind of fall into the team and try to do it. But my level of sailing experience relative to what these guys were doing was dramatically different. Also, when you're a grinder, most grinders look like NFL tight ends. In fact, we had 2 of them on the team. Like, they're like 6'4", 5", like 245, just like huge, like super strong people. And I was finishing swimming. I weighed like, 199, barely there. I looked much like I look now. I just was like outclassed. So I didn't have the physical skill. I didn't have the sailing skill to play at that level. But, go and do the tryout, try and find your way to stand out. And they're like, we're going to look for some other people. So they sent me home. Asked if I could try out again, kind of went out again, they kind of sent me home again. And I just kind of kept pestering them, and then one guy who was probably much better than me chose to go to a different team, and slot opened up, and as they say, rest is history.
I was listening to a podcast with you, and out of that experience, there was something you said that I wonder if it resonates with any startup lessons, and you said, you've just got to get on the team. What is it's been a bit of a mantra, just get on the team. How has that guided you in startups, business, or life?
Well, I think in startups, you find somebody who's great, or you find a team that's out there. Like, don't worry about, well, this is my role, and in the past I did this, and I have this experience. Like, there's too much of that. Like, just get on the team and just start doing work, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And to the extent that you're good at that work, then you'll get rewarded. To the extent you're bad at that work, but you work hard, like, they'll find a different thing for you to do. And so it's just find a way to get on the team. And in that case, it was like, all right, well, I'm the fittest of anybody there. I'm not the strongest, but I'm the fittest. So I was looking at like, okay, well, if we have a long tacking duel, I'll probably be able to sustain myself longer. I showed up first. I stayed last. I volunteered for the crappy jobs. I did the jobs that nobody else wanted to do. So that's the same in startups, is like, come do the work, do more work than you're asked of, show up first, leave last, just get on the team.
Where does that work ethic come from?
Yeah, I mean, we worked hard as kids, but I think sports is a lot of that. Swimming is a super boring sport. And, not boring to participate in, but boring to train for. And it's super rigorous. So the ability to sort of like work hard and take on the load and work a little bit harder at the end and work a little harder at the beginning, that was sort of from 9, 10, 11, 12. And I had good success early on at swimming. So the success bred wanting to do more of it. And that developed the training ethic, and that, like, I started training at higher levels pretty early. And so then that obviously became the thing that felt to me to be important. So the adoration you get for success in something like that early on causes you to train harder, and I suppose that's the work ethic, Sarah. I mean, you could say it's Midwestern as well, but who knows?
Yeah. So I'm really excited your brother's here and gave me some roast material going back to your roots in Michigan City. So he gave me some great stories. We can, I guess, call this a little bit of the younger brother's revenge here coming out tonight. You know, the nickname of Ernie Shavers. I don't know if that rings a bell to you, but apparently you got in a fight with him and you ended up shaving off Ernie of Sesame Street's hair and got into a lot of trouble. Was his favorite toy. He's really pissed at you about this still.
I know.
Speaking to the you know, your swimming background, he told me a story of kind of like your rings and watches that are now in a drawer. He said you were in a very hot competitive swimming meet and you ended up losing to this hot up-and-comer freshman swimmer, cost the meet, and you came home and you took all of those trophies and you put them in a box and put them in a closet, never to be seen again.
All true.
All true. Because earlier tonight you said anything he was telling me was false. So, okay.
I was challenging you to choose the things he made up.
Okay.
He's incredibly creative and he's very funny about those things, and he's smart enough that he would tell you something just enough off that, you know, would get me out here.
Yeah. So the story that resonated with me perhaps the most, though, was later in life. You guys occasionally do outdoor-oriented races. You know, sea to mountains, you know, kayaking, mountain biking, all sorts of crazy stuff. So Rob was telling me a story about this adventure race you were doing, 24-hour adventure race, mountain biking in Moab, 24 hours of Moab, pretty famous bike race. And in the first mile of the race, you wiped out and hurt your finger, he said. You kept riding, not only that leg, but for the rest of the race. And at one time you came into the race and you said, we just got to finish this race. We got to keep going. And Rob looked at your finger and he said it was at a 40-degree angle. And later learned it was shattered. He came back to Seattle. You've got 3 to 4 pins, I assume, still in your hand. And the moral of the story was, and a quote from Rob was, I'd put this on the list of what makes TA tick. He's got a high tolerance for pain in many ways, both physical and for pushing through hard work. Why is that?
True story. That's why I wear my ring on this finger, because this finger doesn't fit anymore. It's all swollen back in here, and so I told you I was clumsy. I mean, it was really quite embarrassing. You know, I mean, it's like the first turn in the race, I crash, fall down, break my finger. Hopeless. I'm a bad team member for sure. I don't know. I don't really know where that comes from.
Well, we'll keep on the finger component because Greg Gottesman also told me to ask you about Rupert Murdoch's finger. What's the story there?
You know, entrepreneurs come to PSL all the time, or investors come to PSL all the time. And, you know, they're there to have a tour and listen to our companies and maybe meet the managing directors or something like that. You know, it's like, I hope that Greg would say, like, oh, TA did this as an entrepreneur, and he did that, and he brings this to PSL. But the story is always, tell me about Rupert. Let me tell you the Rupert Murdoch's finger story. So I was sailing on a boat called Sayonara, which maybe we'll have that photo. I don't know if that's still there.
Sayonara.
Sayonara's a good one. Anyways, Larry Ellison hired, the co-founder of Oracle, hired me and some of the guys off the 95 America's Cup to get involved in sailing. So we built this boat called Sayonara for him. And we campaigned it all over the world. And we were in Australia, and we were getting ready to do the biggest race in Australia. It's called the Sydney to Hobart race. So it starts in Sydney and goes south to the island of Tasmania and Hobart. And Larry, being Larry, invited Rupert Murdoch to come sailing with us, and who was going to actually do the race with us. And Rupert was an okay sailor, but not a pro by any means. And Sayonara is a big boat, 85 feet long. It's a maxi boat. So it's quite complicated to sail. Full pro team, like best in the world pro team. Anyway, we're out sailing one day. We come back into the harbor. We're getting ready to take the main down. And for anybody who's a sailor there, when you take the sails down, you luff them. So you sort of come into the wind, luff them to reduce the load. And when you're sailing in a straight line, all the ropes which are holding on to the sails are under tension, and so they're kind of static. Well, when you start luffing it, all of a sudden they become untensioned, and Rupert was holding onto the main sheet, and as it became tension, it went up this way, and his finger went over the block in between the rope and the block or the pulley. Cut it right off. Yeah, like boom, just like a knife, just smack dab, like right here, about there. And so, the story gets worse or better depending on your perspective. So we were right in front of the Sydney Opera House, and like anybody seen that Julia Child Saturday Night Live skit, where the blood's like spurting out the end, and now it had been sort of crushed as well as cutting the finger off, so it wasn't spurting quite as much as that skit. But anyway, plenty of blood, fingers on the deck, and so there were two of us on the boat that were trained medics. And so we're like, okay, great. So we got the finger, we packed it in ice, we bandaged his finger, packed his hand in ice. In comes the tender or the chase boat. Off to the hospital goes Rupert and the finger. Sew it back on. This is totally working today, still signing checks. Now the last part of that Greg sort of has added on to the story, which I like, is I've yet to call on Rupert for any favors for any of that. But we are waiting for the time that maybe one of our companies is at just about the right stage that we have to call in for the Rupert signing of the final check.
Nice. Well, congrats to you for that achievement. I'm not going to ask you what the startup lesson is in saving Rupert Murdoch's finger.
Isn't that obvious?
Yes. I think we're going to move into Q&A, and we got Frank Paganelli of Lane Powell. And while he queues up, I'll just ask one other question, because I've got a whole list here, and I know we didn't even get to a segment here. But as Frank comes up and starts that off for us, I'll go back to your brother, Rob, who also gave me a great quote. He said, TA is always pushing himself and always pushing those around him. He can become disappointed if others on the team are not pushing themselves. So my question there is, how do you motivate others to share that same passion and drive?
Well, I would say this is an area of personal improvement for me. It's not necessarily the best kind of personality to be around. And I think it's had negative implications on people around me. It could be people I work with, people in my family. It's not fun to be around somebody who feels that you're disappointed in them all the time because they're not whatever enough. Not good enough, not hard enough, not trying enough, not skilled enough, not whatever. And I feel like that for me, I know has caused pain in people around me. And so while that may be true, it's not something I necessarily admire about myself. And I certainly don't admire or care for the impact of that. So it's an area that I'm actually trying to improve on a lot. It's fine for me to push myself, but it's not fine to make other people feel somehow less than because they may not have the capacity, they may not have the background, they may not have the desire, they may have different priorities. So it's something that I'm sort of thinking about, trying to, while maintaining my own ability to push myself, because I don't mind that. But also, like I've done a lot, and I should be happy with that. And don't always have to keep improving all the way. So it's something that I'm still exploring, understanding more about myself, understanding more about others. That said, to achieve great things is hard. To achieve great things, important things, not to say what I've done is important, but to achieve important things takes sacrifice. Takes sacrifice for yourself, takes sacrifice from other people. It's hard, it's not always fun, and yet I think the ability to sort of choose. We had a guy come and do a Friday talk. At PSL, every Friday we have kind of free lunch. And so any of you entrepreneurial kind of people want to come and visit us on Friday, learn more about PSL, come see us, and we'll try and find a spot on Friday lunch. We had a guy come in, a good friend of mine, named John Bergen, incredible athlete, and he was the top American finisher in the race across America. So this is start in Oceanside, California, ride your bike to Annapolis, Maryland, as fast as you can, nonstop, pretty much. He did it in 10 days. He was riding about 22 hours a day. his training regimen is incredible. So whatever this is, like John Bergen, all of a sudden, like, up here. But what John said is, he said, he tried to do the start of analogy. You should have John Bergen come and talk.
Yeah, I was just saying.
He's
And
badass.
Todd Bishop's back there.
Todd Bishop. Get John Bergen.
This would
He's
be
awesome.
a great power talk at the GeekWire Summit. So
He's
we would love an intro.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
But his sort of thing is like, okay, set a goal that's bigger than yourself. Okay, doing a startup, bigger than yourself. It's not about me, it's about us. It's about the world that we're trying to affect. Answer the question of what are you willing to sacrifice to get to that goal? I mean, that's personal sacrifice, family sacrifice, financial sacrifice, etc. And then make a plan for success. And like that was his 3 lessons, and I think those are really good.
Let's go to audience Q&A, and we're going to start off with Frank Paganelli from Lane Powell. And if others have questions, just line up behind Frank and ask away.
Thanks, TA. What an incredible story. I was going to ask, but you solved it at the end, is that drive you have innate or learned? But you sort of explained how it can be learned in a way. I mean, do you have a fundamental sense of that? And you've worked with a lot of high performers.
Well, I think I would say I think it's more learned. I think it's so difficult to quantify, like, are you just born with that? And it may be a certain level of insecurity as a young person that you're trying to prove something. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs have some chip on their shoulder to prove something to somebody. And that might be prove it to the world, it might be prove it to their parents, it might be prove it to their brother, or whatever. So what are you trying to prove, and who are you trying to prove it to is often a question I ask in interviews. Because it's interesting what people answer, how they answer that. And so that becomes what's the chip on your shoulder? And then it becomes have you learned the process of suffering and the process of some level of success? Right? All of this entrepreneurship stuff is significant amounts of suffering. Maybe not as much as racing across America, maybe not as much as other things, but it's a lot of suffering. Emotional suffering, physical suffering. And so have you trained yourself to suffer? And that's where I think where the athletics component is. Most people have a coach or a set of teammates who push them beyond what they think they can do, the goal bigger than themselves, and push through a level of suffering. And if you're like, oh, well, this isn't as hard as that. And in that sense, the suffering, I think, is important.
That's really useful. Thank you.
Hi. So what kind of things do you take into consideration when you're deciding to, I hate to overuse the analogy, but pass the torch to maybe a skipper who's more competent to a larger company?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that because I haven't had to do it, per se.
So, for example, you mentioned BlackBerry.
Yeah.
You were the CEO, but then you decided to pass it off to, I think it was Google, was it?
Gist was the company, BlackBerry was the acquirer, or Synosis was the company, Google was the acquirer.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the two.
In the BlackBerry case, I remained effectively the CEO of that thing, right? They said, like, okay, we want you to come and run this and realize your vision. Like, that's part of the reason you're here. And I ended up with a pretty wide sort of spectrum of responsibility at BlackBerry. In the other case was the opposite. So I was perceived in the Synosis case as kind of like the business guy, and we're like, they're buying the technology. Like, we don't really need the business guy. We don't really need a CEO. We don't really need a product manager kind of a person. So in that case, like, I didn't go with the acquisition. That said, they've never shipped the acquisition. Like, never has made it to market. So, hard to say what was required to make that particular thing successful. It's very difficult in both cases because whatever you perceive, it's got to be 1 in 100 that the acquisition plays out the way it says. So if anybody's listened to, one of my partners at PSL is Ben Gilbert. Oh, Ben, did he come? He has this awesome podcast called Acquired. And Acquired focuses on acquisitions and IPOs and what happened. Like, what's the story? What's the narrative? What happened? Is it good? Is it bad? It's a great podcast, and it talks a little bit about this topic that you bring up, which is what happens in the acquisition, who runs what, who takes ownership of it, how does it become either the thing they thought it was going to be or something very different, or nothing, which is actually most of the case.
Okay, thanks for the
Acquired.fm. It is an excellent podcast.
Yeah.
Carter.
What's going on, TA? Thanks so much for speaking tonight. So I'm a sole founder, and I've spent the last year or so sort of on a co-founder hunt. And I've talked to an awful lot of like really amazing people. And your comment just a few minutes ago about sacrifice just made me think about something. I think there's a backwards-looking classic definition of like what founders need to do to be successful. It usually involves working 80 hours a week and sort of making every possible sacrifice. And I just know in a lot of the conversations I've had with people, many of them, family people or women, they've had problems with that idea. And as an observer, just looking at startup founders, like it's kind of a homogenous group. So I'm just wondering, I mean, like, do you see any possibility of like the definition of sacrifice changing or evolving on a go forward basis such that people can be founders but not make the kind of sacrifices that a lot of people find to be unacceptable? I'm just curious what you think about that.
My unfortunate answer is not really. That said, I think there are ways to mitigate it or to get to a place, especially if you craft a way for the startup to get to modest scale faster. So the 2 or 3 founders in the basement where everybody has to do everything, and a lot of stuff you're doing is stuff you're not good at, but you don't want to afford it to do somebody who's actually good at it. So to the extent that you can find a fast way to get to 10, 15, 20, 30 people, then I think you get to a place where you can focus on the thing you know how to do really well. And in that way, you know how to do it well in a smaller amount of time and just as good, if world-class kind of way. That said, and that's part of what we do at PSL, it's part of what studios or accelerators are helpful in doing, is to get past the 2 people in the basement kind of mode much more rapidly to get to a place where you have sweet spot. But this is a competitive thing, right? Most of us work on startups where someone had a similar insight at the same time, and the person that is either working harder or working harder better, and that's a place where skill and expertise and stamina, and you're like, oh, I've been training this for freaking 20 years to be able to do that much effort at that level with this much intensity. If you sustain that, like, I think you're going to win. Like, or if you're at it's 5 o'clock, I got to go, it's pretty difficult. Now that said, I do feel that both Rob and I, having done a lot of startups and worked on it together, when our kids were very little, and all the way through, I mean, our kids were born when we were doing startups and we're still doing startup stuff, I think we did a reasonably good job of work-life integration. I use that word specifically, it's a Brad Feld word, integration. Balance, not really. Integration, better. Sometimes as a founder, you have more flexibility than you might if you work at a big company. Like, okay, well, I made a really important thing. I used to love to walk my daughter to school. It was super important to me. It was an amazing time. I just so awesome to be able to do that. And I like to be involved in her school. So while I was doing startups, I still had lots and lots of involvement with other things. Could I have spent that hour on a couple other things? Probably. Could I have been a little bit better? Maybe. At a point, you hit a sort of asymptote, a flatter part of the curve. That said, like, it's hard. And if the company down the street is working that much harder or that much better, like, they're going to probably win.
Awesome. Thanks.
Kirby.
Yeah, so my question is around identifying, the difference between, well, what do you think is more important? A founder who has an athletic background, let's say competitive athletics through high school, maybe hopefully college, or someone who is currently either competitive athletically or focused heavily on fitness. Like, how do you see, or how do you see both of those, maybe either one or both of those differentiating success versus someone who has neither of those traits?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have enough sample set to say that they correlate to success or not. But I would say if I'm choosing, if you force me to choose, then I would take the person that has experienced high-level success and or suffering, which usually are correlated, over the person that's just currently interested in fitness or athletics or whatever. Because most of us, as we move into middle age and you're doing startups, like, you don't get to play at a high level anymore. You just don't. You don't have the time, you don't have the commitment, you have other stuff that's going on. That said, I believe very strongly that if you're in the doing more better, meaning if you're taking care of yourself, if you're paying attention to your sleep, if you're eating properly, if you're thinking about how do I get the most out of this physical body and brain that I have, I think that's additive. I don't think it's required. I think it's additive. Does it get you 5% more? Maybe 10% more? Maybe. If you layer that on top of someone who has the athletic background of suffering, pain, training, goal setting, structure, those are just additive. But the one of how do I make myself healthier? How do I make myself more productive? Is totally achievable for most people. They just don't pay attention to it.
So we're coming to a close here. We'll take these last two. If we can go quickly through them, that'd be great.
Hi everyone, my name is Felicity. I'm actually from University of Washington, and I actually just started my program as the Master of Science in Entrepreneurship. So I get to know this program through my professor. I'm really happy to come here. So I actually have two questions. So I just have a lot of ideas how to do my startup, and I originally from China, so I just really want to start my school. And I recently was thinking about a question about is entrepreneur like born or made? Because I want to see myself, like I'm not an entrepreneur yet, but I want to be. So I'm just wondering, is people born with some charms or personality, or people can be trained to be like a really successful entrepreneur?
Well, I would separate training in two different categories. One, there's a tremendous amount of functional, since I taught in the Master of Entrepreneurship, so I know the group. There's a tremendous amount of functional expertise which is required to do what we do. I mean, fundraising, go to market, finding customers, building a team, et cetera. That's all just functional stuff.
Okay.
Most of us never had any of that functional education, hence the program itself or other work they're doing at UW. There's a lot of functional stuff we can teach. Mm-hmm. Then there's the drive and passion and acceptance of risk. And in that sense, a lot of people are just not willing to accept, first of all, the risk.
Yes.
And that's personal risk, social risk, financial risk. There's a lot of risk. And they're not willing to accept that for the perception of potential success. Then the next part is just drive and persistence, the things we've been talking about, which are just sort of qualities that I think you have to train yourself into. I think it's very difficult to say, you know what, tomorrow I'm just going to have that level of drive. Tomorrow I'm going to have that big chip on my shoulder to prove to this person that I can do it, or to this set of people that I can do it. That's very difficult to train yourself into. You can train the functional skills. And I think the Venn diagram of those things is what you're really looking for in a great entrepreneur. Yeah. And to the extent you haven't done it, you just have to answer the question for yourself is how more quickly can I get into it, or how do I have to over-index, which just made me more sacrifice now. So if you look at the total area of the curve, area under the curve of sacrifice, of pain and suffering, and you're like, oh, okay, so I started that when I was 9 or 10, and then swimming all the way through college, mechanical engineering while I was still swimming through college, then quitting to go sailing. Like, there's just pain and suffering for like 40 years.
Wow, that's
I'm 53,
long time.
so that's like
Yeah.
pain and suffering. Then like finish college, then go to entrepreneurship, and then fail the company, and then like it's just like pain and suffering for a long time.
But people enjoyed it, isn't it? It's how you kind of test it out, even you're suffering, but you still kind of continue. I think
there's a few of us.
Uh-huh.
I think there is enjoyment in the suffer. Like if you talk to people who are like big mountain climbers, like people who climb like Everest, etc., they're like, I'm enjoying. It's freaking bad. Like it's really, really hard out here. Kind of good. Kind of fun. Like talk to John Bergen. He's like suffering. Loved it.
Let's take our last question. Yeah,
Okay.
Thanks.
John Bergen's gonna be a good guest for you.
Oh yes, please make that intro.
He's hardcore.
Yes.
Hey, really enjoyed your talk tonight as a former athlete and new member to the startup industry. Just really appreciated your overall theme of maintaining a high energy level. So I think that's super important both in athletics and being successful in business. And I would be curious to hear maybe lessons you've learned within the office that allow you to maintain a high energy level, but then outside of the office, how you maintain but also grasp for more there.
Yeah. Great. You didn't ask this, but I'll get the side project thing.
I know. I didn't get to that one.
So there's two components to the energy. I'll call it emotional energy and physical energy. I'll separate those. So the physical energy, as we talked about, right? I mean, are you an athlete? Are you taking care of your body? And there's a lot of stuff we can do there. And I think there's a tremendous amount more that we can do in that particular category. Then I'm going to call it emotional energy. So I feel like so incredibly fortunate to be at PSL because I'm energized by ideas. I'm energized by other people who have ideas. I'm energized by progress. I'm energized by amazing engineering. I'm amazed by design. And like the PSL is like, it's just full of those people. It's full of new ideas, excitement, and that energizes me, and hopefully I put that energy back into it. So that's one. Find yourself in a place like this place. Like there's people who are like, oh my God, let me tell you about my idea, like globe spinning, like we're doing this and this and this and this and this, and it's so cool, and this is why it's important. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm excited. I'm excited by her excitement. I'm excited by Kwame's excitement. I'm excited by that. And so putting yourself in places where that excitement is happening, I happen to be lucky enough to do it all day long, every day with amazing people who are super excited about what they're doing. I hate that term, super excited. It feels so, ugh. Anyway, excited. I'm super excited to be here. And then the other thing is finding yourself with other people who are just engaged and excited. And it doesn't matter, and that's where, for me, I get that from side projects. So I'm a huge fan of side projects. Anybody who knows me well, I talk a lot about side projects. I've started companies that came from side projects. And side projects are an opportunity for me to be around other people who I just think are fun and interesting and exciting. And the project is sort of irrelevant. It's more, how do I get to hang out with Lauren and Kevin, who are both amazing people and exciting, and the thing we chose to do together is a podcast. Okay, let's figure out how to do a podcast. None of us knew how to do a podcast. Let's go do it. Why? Because we're going to learn something. Why? Because we're interested in the content. And why? Because we want to hang out with each other. And so I try to have one or two side projects going on at any given time, much to the chagrin of people who want, who are like, hey, why do you do so much extra stuff? Because it's fun. It's exciting. It's interesting. It's energy. It brings me energy even though it's work. And it brings me energy to be around other people who are excited about the thing or excited about being with me and learning from each other. So I encourage side projects a lot because even if you're doing your regular thing, you learn something else from doing a side project.
I love that you brought up the side projects because it was a question of mine. I've had the opportunity to interview hundreds, if not thousands, of entrepreneurs. And through that process, there are nuggets that have stuck with me. And with TA, this is something that has always resonated with me, is how you empower or get around people to enjoy those side projects. So I love that we were able to get on that because I think it's super valuable advice. Before we wrap, we're going to do rapid fire. So quick. You ready for this? You mentioned your podcast. TA has a really cool podcast called How to Live to 200. How can people find it?
That's it. Living200.com.
Living200.com. So the first rapid fire question, in what year will the first person celebrate their 200th birthday? Quick math.
That person has been born today, I think.
Oh, wow.
So it's less than 200 years from now.
Wow, interesting.
I think that's probably, 50, 60 years from now.
Wow. Okay, cool. Which entrepreneur do you most admire?
I'm going to say Brad Feld, and he is an entrepreneur, but he's somebody that has invested in companies with us. He's very involved with PSL. I consider him an entrepreneur. He's a founder of Techstars, and he's sort of, one of my idols.
Yeah, he's amazing. What does TA stand for?
Thomas Arthur McCann III.
Why do you go by TA?
Well, Dad was Tom and grandfather was Art, and they called me TA when I was born the whole time, and by the time I figured out I was going to be a pain in the ass, it was too late.
Motto you live by?
Is Teresa still here? No, she left.
Can't get a lifeline on that one.
Yeah, no. It's in this realm of the part I talked about, sort of always wanting more and all that. So I have lived by happy but never satisfied for a long period of time. And it works for me, but I'm not sure it works for other people because never satisfied feels like so disappointing. Like, can't you ever just be satisfied? Can't you just like have a Sunday and just be like, it's good enough, it's fine. Like, why do you have to do more? So I'm very conflicted, but that would be the answer.
Book on your nightstand.
Hacking Darwin. It's all about genetics and genetic engineering, which I think is absolutely the future and something that's very in the living at 200 category.
What are you listening to?
Gosh, I love Acquired. It's
Yeah.
so good. I like got onto that, and I'm just being like full on Acquired. I love it.
Absolutely. If you were on the debate stage tonight, and thank you for joining us and spending your time with, I think, a more valuable discussion, what one message would you provide to the American people?
I focus on the Green New Deal.
All right. And we'll wrap up. Back to sailing. Favorite place to sail?
I'm gonna answer it in 3. So the best place in the U.S. is Hawaii. It's amazing, warm water, windy all the time, great scenery. I think my favorite place to sail, kind of on the planet, is Sardinia, Italy. Like for that, and then the most amazing place is the Southern Ocean, like because not many people get there, and it's so unique. There's like nothing down there. The world is spinning. The wind is blowing, 40, 50, 60 knots. The waves are gigantic. There's icebergs around. It's just, it's a unique adventure experience. So those would be my 3 answers.
And that's it. Let's hear it for T.A. McCann of Primary Square Labs. T.A., thank you. Thanks for being here.